Hey folks, welcome back to the Dark Horse Podcast 39th live stream Q&A, where we fulfill your desire to see more pets and answer your questions.
Including one super chat question for more cat butt. So we have primed the pump and put cat butt appreciating, attracting stuff in the sink behind us. And there we have Fairfax's rear end.
You put something in the sink?
Yes.
Okay. That would explain it.
Yes. Yes. Once he's done with what's in the sink, he will presumably be showing his face to us.
Aha.
Yes. All right. We are going to start with three questions from episode 38, and then pull a question that came off of the Discord that was voted on by Discord, and then walk right into questions from today. So, number one from last time. Given that having gay people in a society seems to be adaptive, how did the homophobia and the Abrahamic religions manage to survive?
Wow, I'm going to have to I'm going to tantalize you with a piece of an answer without delivering the full answer, because as I keep saying, But
before you do that, let me just say it's having gay people in a society isn't adaptive. That's too universal a claim, right? It's going to be adaptive in particular situations.
Yeah. What I would say is homosexuality is going to turn out to be adaptive, which doesn't mean it's adaptive in every case. But I would just say that I believe the answer to your question is that the homophobia is also adaptive. And I'm not defending it, but what I'm saying is that the fact of homosexuality and the fact of resistance to it being a phenomenon out in the open is part and parcel of the same explanation, which I hope to deliver soon. Maybe we will get a vaccine. We will be able to return to the world. We can rent a hall. Wouldn't that be nice?
Being able to travel again, for instance.
I would love to do that.
Yeah.
Yep.
That would be terrific.
All right. Sorry, I hate to put off an answer here, but it just seems like burying it in a Q&A is not the way to do it. This is important enough, and enough rests on the way the answer functions that I think we have to do it in a larger form.
Mm-hmm. The only real driving factor for men appears to be to have sex. That is, until they have children, then the main drive for most shifts to equipping and protecting their offspring. Do you agree that these are the only two drives for men? Could they eventually negate each other?
Wow. Yeah, I think
that's another big one.
There's a lot in that question that I would disagree with, right? I would say sex is a major driving factor for men, but that there's really two versions of that. There's the find a life partner version and the have sex without commitment version, and those function very differently. The former is closely aligned with the commitment that men have to their children when their certainty of paternity is high. But I wouldn't say that these are the only drives either. In fact, I would say that one of the things that is deranging society is that men used to be driven to achieve things because it allowed them to partner with more desirable mates, and that actually created a lot of the value in the world, and that as much as I think women being freed to participate in society in all kinds of different roles is a very positive thing, that it did have this negative externality, which is that males are not as motivated to move mountains as they once were. And so anyway, it would be interesting to have an adult conversation about how to restore the positives without banishing anyone to unfulfilling work or work they did not prefer. And surely there's a solution to that, but it does involve us being candid and not pretending that everything is categorical, good, bad, discrimination, liberty.
That's right. And we explore this in the book that we are writing that will be out next year, and I explore this in an essay on the evolution of sex and love that should be out any day now. That we will perhaps talk about just a little bit once it is out. So you'll get more on this soon in this space. Watch this space. Final question from episode 38 that we are going back to. In your AB political trough model, Bret, Could the A and B peaks increase or decrease contralaterally during societal well-being, contraction, and expansion? Love you both. I'm not sure exactly what contralaterally means, but I take that to be sort of if they're on a line with one another. So, as one increases, the other one decreases.
Could they increase or decrease contralaterally during societal well-being, contraction, expansion, meaning that you are more likely to drop over one than the other?
Yeah.
Yeah. I see no reason to expect that they are equally tall peaks at any moment. They may pass through it, but yeah.
But would they oscillate? I'm not sure, actually. I'm not sure what increase, decrease contralaterally might mean, but I sort of read it as, oscillate in some sort of inverse correlated manner. And I don't know. I mean, you cleverly didn't define A and B. This will work. This is a model that would work for a number of different situations across a number of different moments in time. So,
well, I kind of did. I at least did a prototype version, which involves a Marxist failure mode and a fascist failure mode.
That's right. You did.
And so I would say, yeah, the danger of those is not inherently equal. It may equalize over time because basically it's a question of which excesses are you more deaf to at the moment. You're more likely to go over the peak that you can't see than the one that you see because recent history has informed you about it.
At any one moment, clearly there is going to be a greater risk of one than the other, although one thing that is interesting about this moment is how loudly some on the fringe left are yelling about the possibility of one outcome when many of us actually find the other outcome much more likely.
Yeah. So I would say this is, I think, a case where you don't want to over-instantiate the model. The model works as a loose metaphor, and it tells you sort of roughly what the dangers are. But if you try to map it onto the world and be precise about the height of the peaks and things, you are liable to lose the value of it and turn it into something that will inherently be false because the map will be imprecise.
All right. This question from the voters on Discord. Let's see, I got one of them that I'm going to hold off for next time for reasons that I talked to the guy who sent it to me about. So we are left with what might explain the success of the Sabbath, day of rest strategy used by religions. Perhaps it's a hedge against the harms of transitioning from hunter-gatherer lifestyles to agricultural lifestyles, or is there a deeper reason, and do any other animals take Sabbath?
I think I deployed an answer in one of my very early videos right after the evergreen thing happened.
You did talk about Sabbath, I think. Yeah.
So the model I've had for Sabbath for a long time is that it is an instantiation of it is an adaptive state that risks a game theoretic failure, and Sabbath is the way to resist the game theoretic failure. And so the way it works is this. Let's say that it is better for society for everybody to take off at least one day a week, that working 7 days a week it causes you to distance yourself from your family, and it results in all sorts of externalized harms that aren't good for anybody. So there needs to be a rule that says take a day off a week. But if you take a day off a week, then you're in a puzzle. Let's say that you're a shopkeeper. And what you want to do is you want to figure out the day of the week that everybody else is taking off and the shop is closed, and then you open your shop up and you clean up because people who are looking to shop on that day come to your shop. And so what that does is it puts everybody in motion trying to figure out whether or not a given day is the right one to take off in order to take advantage of the fact that everybody else is not doing the job on that day. So this causes another problem, which is it may be that if people are playing that game trying to find the day on which their shop will do best, that actually you will cheat. And what you will do is you will not close your shop because actually you want to clean up from the days that everybody is.
It's an underrun around. It's a formalized prescription to avoid the tragedy of the commons.
Exactly. And so you might say, well, God says take a day off every week, and you can't.
And this is the day.
And this is the day. And the thing is, what that allows to happen is that people can enforce God's will, because if you open your shop on the Sabbath, then you're being sacrilegious and people will shun you so that they are not co-stigmatized for shopping on a day that you're not supposed to be selling them stuff. So anyway, that's the basic point, is game theory explains a formulation in which God picks a day and everybody adheres to it, and anybody who doesn't adhere to it is obviously in violation. That's the way to frustrate the race to the bottom that otherwise unfolds.
Yeah. And with regard to any other animals taking Sabbath, we don't know of any other animals that manage to avoid tragedy of the commons, race to the bottom, etc. So, without any external metaphorical enforcement like God will frown on this behavior, I know of no such thing. That said, there are regular intervals of rest, but they tend to be imposed by abiotic forces, external abiotic forces like winter.
Yeah. I'm wondering if there's not some example somewhere, because in Eleanor Ostrom's work, she demonstrates how culture after culture avoids game theoretic failures through essentially informal agreements that are often enforced through religious belief structures. And so what that says is these things evolve, which means there's no bar to them evolving in some creature in which the same bases for such an agreement exists.
Well, so nothing we know of as religion exists outside of humans, but superstition certainly does. And so some superstition that evolved that was adhered to by everyone could look this way.
What you really need is a penalty mechanism, because the problem is that a free rider that recognizes the opportunity created by everybody else adhering to a superstition is at advantage, which is why the game theory works the way it does. And so what you need is a mechanism in which collective policing serves this function. But that's not out of the question in something like
Dolphins,
chimps, dolphins,
elephants,
wolves. Maybe lions, wolves, that kind of thing. So anyway, yes, it may occur to us later, or somebody may message us with an example, but it's certainly not, there's nothing about the evolutionary dynamics that prevent it. It's just that most creatures won't have the important feature that lets it work, which is the mechanism to penalize a stranger. To penalize a stranger without a cost that would be prohibitive.
Right. Okay, first question from last hour's live stream. Girls I meet are divided into those who have intellectual interests, like sensitive men, but are very woke, and the less woke who are not very intellectual, who seem to be consumerists and prefer traditional gender roles. As a young man, how can I date today? Well, that's a really bleak binary picture that you have painted, and I don't envy anyone being young and entering the dating market right now. I guess I'm a little devastated about that description. I know that there are people young women who are both intellectual and not woke, but I don't know where they hang out particularly. They used to hang out in our classrooms, but those don't exist anymore.
Yeah, but I think the thing is, we even know that many of the young women who were in our classrooms, continue into the world. Some of them remain single and some of them are not. But I think the thing is, they suggest a fact, which is many, many people are finding something very troubling in the mating and dating market. And my recommendation would be you figure out the mechanism you're using to figure out who to date is directing you to people who fall into one of two categories that you don't resonate with. The key thing,
how to figure out how to define and maybe create that third, fourth, fifth, whatever it is, category that will have people in it who you're more interested in.
Yes. Where would those people tend? I mean, if they are decrying the lack of men who fit with their model.
Yeah, we certainly, this is now a couple of years old, but we certainly would hear from students of both sexes, straight students of both sexes, that they were having a very hard time finding people with whom they were interested in having a relationship.
Yep.
And for the most part, this wasn't about their standards being ridiculous, right?
No, I think in large measure it has to do with almost everybody below a certain age having been sold a false bill of goods about what is valuable, and that in some sense you're looking for the people who know that the description of what they're supposed to be pursuing is hollow and largely driven by people who want to sell you something rather than people who are actually looking out for your interests. So my recommendation would be figure out how to escape that. You're looking for oddballs. That could be a very rewarding relationship or search for a relationship. And when you find the right person,
where do you find the oddballs? Like what? It depends on what kind of oddballs you want. One of my first guesses would be look for people who are doing something physical, backpacking clubs or bicycling or, sports teams, summer leagues, pickup games of something that are co-ed, ultimate frisbee being particularly responsive to co-ed sport. Just because, as I've said many, many times, and you have said as well, engaging with the world physically makes it really so much harder to accept a lot of the woke garbage that requires that you sort of have no feedback from the world. And physical engagement with the world gives you that feedback, and so you hone your insight. And I think, this is now hypothesis, but given that I've seen so few people who are rock climbers or carpenters or otherwise engaging the world in a real way, who are also really buying into the woke stuff, I think that it basically hones your brain such that it's harder for you to accept the totally socially created conclusions that intersectional bullshit provides. What?
I'm having the thought of a shirt for the postmodern rock climbing club, in which the shirt depicts a cliff. Rising above the cliff is the sound of somebody falling. Because that's what would happen in postmodern rock climbing.
Yeah. It could just even be postmodern rock climbing club and could have the coyote suspended above cliff, not recognizing gravity yet. But,
yes. That too. There you go.
That's the point. That the idea that the rules of physics don't apply to you until you recognize that they're there is super amusing when it's a cartoon coyote, but not so amusing when you're actually contending with these people over issues of whether or not to defund the police, for instance.
I thought that cartoon was about market failure as depicted through the Acme Corporation.
I think they were doing pretty well for themselves, weren't they?
I guess they were.
Yeah, Instahole.
Yeah. All right. Well, I would actually suggest, though, this is just a proof of concept, but you say that you are encountering girls. I would suggest you start searching for women, and you are finding women who have intellectual interests. They like sensitive men. That's a little suspect. Doggy. And they're very woke. Well, here's the thing. Where would you find intellectual women who have no patience for woke? I would say the rationalist community would be one place you would find such people. Now, those people are certainly quirky, but they tend to be quirky in a kind of delightful way. So if that's the dynamic you're trying to break, seek out a community where that formulation doesn't make sense.
Okay.
Right?
It seems to me that maybe it's not all that numerous.
Well,
and my guess would also be that the sex ratio is rather skewed in the direction that this person writing in would not prefer. But those are the stereotypes I hold in my head.
That's true, but it's also like it's a community nested within some other communities, right? And so anyway, all I'm saying, it was just a proof of concept, which is there's a place in which that formulation wouldn't add up.
Yep.
So it's also
there will be others,
and I'm not suggesting you take up with the rationalist community cynically. It's also an interesting community. I think there are some ways in which there are some things that I don't think they get as well as they might, but we all don't get something as well as we might, and it would be an interesting place to spend time.
Yep. Please expand on religion as extended phenotype. If it is an innate human behavior, how do I meet that need without feeling like a hypocrite or causing cognitive dissonance? Can we use open label placebo? We know it's not real, but it still works. So presumably that open label placebo is his request for a label for such a thing.
Yeah, open label placebo.
So which is literally false metaphorically true. That's the same category, I believe.
Yeah, look, how do you meet the need? This is in some sense going to be a personal question. And I think it depends a lot on who you are and what need you are meeting. Some of us do not find that the absence of a metaphysical, ultimate level explanation robs life of meaning. Others do find it kind of frightening. So it really depends on what thing, it's like a little bit like buying a house. You need to figure out what it is that you absolutely require and which things that others require are places that you can borrow from to get what you want. And I don't know. I mean, I know
figure out
people
what your
who would-
values actually are, and what So I guess the thing maybe that you're struggling with, slightly pushing back against in this question, is the idea of an innate human behavior, right? So I think we see that religion or religious-like tendencies are universal across all human cultures where it has been sought. By anthropologists seeking such things. So the universality of an evolved cultural thing does not inherently mean innate. And you won't find us actually choosing usually to use the word innate, because it does raise these questions of, well, then, do you even have a choice? And more to the point, it raises the question for something as complex as religion, which is what's it for? What is the purpose of it? What is it that all of these religious and religious-like beliefs are actually doing for people? And you pointed out one of them in your answer, a belief in a metaphysical being that created and or is looking out for all of us. But of course, we know that they also bring together community. It acts as a kind of social safety net. So part of the reason that we are likely seeing a growth in the governmental social safety net in the mid-20th century is as religion declines as one that people can rely on. And do we all want to have a social safety net of some sort in place? I think the vast majority of us do. But should that be within a religious community that might also make demands of you that you would not otherwise want demanded of you? So, what are all of the needs that religion may meet, and figure out which of those things are your top 5 values and priorities, and then figure out from there what you want to do.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on the origins of life? Small questions today. By the way, thank you very much for your podcast. I'm thrilled by an opportunity to ask questions of world-class scientists. Are all professors in the U.S. like you? Yes, all of them. You are the professors I wish I would have had. Thank you for that.
That's very nice.
So the first question was, what are your thoughts on the origins of life?
Yes. I'm for it.
Yep.
For one thing.
And I think it happened.
I hate to be late to the party, but I'm here.
You're here? You want a drink or?
I do, actually.
Yes, I thought so.
It's a tough question. Look, we get asked this with some regularity. I think people are fascinated for understandable reasons in, origin of life questions. In some sense, it's outside the realm of what we actually study. It's like, if you find a cosmologist and you ask them, well, what's outside the universe? And it's like, well, you hit the border of where my expertise is relevant. And so here's the thing. I'm not worried about whether there's a good origin of life explanation. I'm actually quite convinced that life straightforwardly arises from certain dynamics. It was very interesting.
And therefore will have done so many, many, many times across the universe.
Yeah, I find it almost inconceivable that it would be rare. Given conditions that are conducive
on planets that are within certain constraints, etc.
Right. But
or large asteroids.
The details. Yeah, large asteroids not so much, probably.
I think it's possible.
Yeah.
Possible. Not in our solar system.
But anyway, I'm not sure quite what to say about it. I thought back in 1976, Dawkins' proof of concept that you could lay out a narrative of essentially non-living chemistry being selected by wind blowing things across a dry landscape, and some things sticking and some things not sticking.
That was unselfish gene.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And he didn't present it as this is the answer. He's like,
here's a story
like this.
Here's a possible story.
And I'm not sure it was his to begin with, but I think the basic point is Life is the extension of a deeper pattern of selection, that it is selection plus heredity that gives you adaptation, which eventually gives rise to things that you would automatically recognize as living. But selection happens in the inorganic world all the time, and it results in all of the patterns you are capable of detecting that are outside of biology. So that same process happens onto a pathway that leads to something we call life at some point, but it's not, I don't think it's in any way surprising that it does that with some regularity. So I guess the thing that I'm getting at is people, I think, mistake the difficulty for isolating what the exact pathway was for the difficulty in establishing that there is a pathway by which it would happen. And I think one of these is a very low bar and one of them is a very high bar. But the fact that it's hard to know what happened here because the evidence is gone is not in and of itself daunting.
Teaching an environment after X number of years doesn't produce Mozart or Bach. Studies link brain differences and gifts in sport and science. Jordan Peterson talks about IQ and life success. Why does nobody talk about inequality with regard to talents and IQ? Is it because of political correctness and social justice thinking? Couldn't we help find early talents and so reform education?
I think there's a hidden assumption here that I think is just dead wrong. IQ is real, but people tend to assume that IQ is genetically encoded, which I think there's much less evidence for than people think, because what they find is that it is hereditary, but hereditary can mean all kinds of things that have everything to do with external influences rather than a blueprint for how to do cognition that exists in the genome, which it can't. So anyway, I think people assume too much from the fact of they hear the word IQ, they assume that that's a parameter that you are given, like, you know, your structure of your hemoglobin, and they proceed from there. And in fact, IQ is much more plastic than people imagine, and that we will eventually figure that out. And it does mean that the chances that we are similarly cognitively capable between populations are much higher. I would rate them as much higher than other people would tend to. But in the end, I'm just betting that's where it'll end up.
All right, there's a ton more to say there, but maybe in the interest of getting through more questions, we'll stop there. Consider the idea that much, if not all, motive power of current social disharmony is a symptom of the 4 new kinds of radiation coming to us around the sun since 1993, UVC among them, and increasing in magnitude, affecting humanity's evolution. I don't know anything about this. I don't know if this is true.
1993?
Yeah, I don't. This. I've never heard this. It strikes me off the top of my head as something I wouldn't believe if you said it to me. But
4 new kinds of radiation coming to us around the sun since 1993.
Yeah.
Do
So
you think of any reason 1993 should be special?
nope. But if the person who wrote this has a reference that you would send to. Is it DarkHorse Moderator, Zach? Is it darkHorseModerator@gmail.com where the moderator is?
Is 1993 going to be ozone hole?
Maybe it's around then.
Yeah, don't know.
Yep.
My guess would be very unlikely.
Yeah.
To be an abiotic influence like that. I mean, you know, the only way would be complete disruption of cognition, significant enough to derange.
Right. Although, you know, it's not unprecedented, right? You know, you've spoken before about the lead being taken out of gasoline, and we see rates of violent crime decreasing. You know, rates of violent crime in 1970s in cities was quite high, and lead was taken out of gas in late 70s something. I can't remember exactly
I can't
when,
remember the date either.
but somehow it tracks really nicely. Like it does seem to be, and again, saying that does not suggest that lead was the cause of all violent crime, but that it seemed lead in the air seemed to both decrease general IQ in people who lived in very air polluted areas and also increase rates of violence. Criminality. So, it's not that there couldn't be some abiotic factor that is contributing to something, but this seems too global.
Too global.
And I mean, we also just don't know, maybe it's, a hole in the ozone layer is what's being alluded to here.
Yeah, which
would then be, we'd expect the
abiotic.
penguins to be going crazy first.
Well, they are. Just look at how they dress.
All the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
But so, yes, you're right that global use of tetraethyl lead would does seem to have caused some level of social disruption, or at least plausibly did. What I'm doubting is 4 new kinds of radiation.
Yeah. And I mean, this may just be imprecisely written, for things that weren't reaching the Earth before. I don't know. I mean, but certainly, given the little thing that I got into thinking about UVC in the last couple of weeks.
Yep.
UVC is hitting the Earth at higher rates now since the ozone hole has been growing. So that's that's at least a possible connection here. Next question. Keep up the good work. You once mentioned that markets are not a good tool for science. Would you consider saying that government is not a good tool either for science for some issues? Or wait, no. The government is not a good tool for science, or that government? I think
not
that's
a
what
good
that means.
tool for science either. Yeah.
Oh,
government is a terrible tool for some things. I would argue that science is not one of them, because what science really needs is insulation from markets, which means that somebody needs to fund that which we need done, and to be done insensitively to what the market thinks of the conclusion.
Yeah.
So
I mean, what we had, so the government is an answer that solves the problem of it being done by rich aristocrats. Right, science being only available to people who are sort of landed gentry.
Good governance is a manifestation of the public well-being. So in order to get the science done that is in our collective interest, good governance, is able to direct the resources and immunize the process from market forces. So I would say, in some sense,
it allows a wider swath of humanity access to becoming scientists.
Yeah. So I think this is one of these cases where we've seen malignant government, and so people are distrustful of it, rightly. Mm-hmm. But that isn't an indictment of governance. It's an indictment of the corrupt governance structures that we currently have.
Yep. How would you respond to people whose response to an unpopular scientific fact is that most scientific studies are corrupted by the institutions that are funding them? Are there any means for regular, that is non-scientist people, to find out the reliability of any study? This is an important question, and it's at some level going to require that you learn some of the sort of code words that people use in the papers within the fields that you're interested in discerning, and become at least capable, somewhat scientifically literate yourself. That said, the peer-reviewed literature, the primary literature, is mostly such a mess that I really don't want to recommend that to anyone unless you are required to do it. So, how do we encourage people to become more scientifically literate and to actually assess themselves what a study says, given that, as we have shown time after time right here, and we used to all the time in our classrooms, not only is most primary literature flawed to some degree and written so as not to be decipherable by many people outside of the field, but the media, when individual research is covered by the media, it's almost always done so badly that if you just take the media cover of a story, you will end up with some wrong assessment of what the research said. So that's a description of the problem without solution making at all. Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, I think it's hopeless. I think no. I mean, are you going to, as a private citizen, be able to unpack the garbage work in some field you haven't studied? You shouldn't expect that you will be able to, unless you have an extraordinary capacity and interest in that field, you're not going to be able to train yourself to do it without spending a huge amount of time. The best thing you can do is find somebody with a track record of figuring out where the work is valid and where it isn't valid. So in some sense, a Nassim Taleb-like figure can be your guide to what high quality work looks like and what nonsense looks like. So you can sort of proxy. And of course, Nassim has his blind spots. But he's following him is probably better than it is trying to, reinvent the wheel.
Yeah. In terms of, I don't want to say it's hopeless. I mean, because this is something that I in particular used to try to help students with, is try to demonstrate how to become intelligent consumers, unfortunately, of the scientific literature. With the recognition going in that it's not written to be understood by outsiders, and yes, scientists view everyone who's not actively doing science in that field, for the most part, as outsiders. So it's not an uncorrupt phenomenon at all. So one thing, and this is by no means perfect, is to look for the hypothesis. If you are actually looking at a paper that was written, a piece of primary literature, meaning a paper written by the people who actually did the research itself, look for the hypothesis clearly stated up front in both the abstract and the introduction. And increasingly, scientists who are not hypothesis-driven will game this and pretend that they had a hypothesis all along and put it up front. But it's also amazing how many papers don't even pretend. And so if you're looking at research that doesn't even pretend that it had a hypothesis, then I would say right away you can say, I don't really need to spend time here. And when we were professors and I was asked to do peer review of papers for a variety of journals, it was amazing to me how many papers my primary review that went back was, I see no evidence of a hypothesis here. I can't recommend that you publish this. I was not particularly beloved among journal editors as a result, because the number of papers coming in that just had no pretense of hypothesis was amazing.
Yeah, no, it is a total failure. But even in the case of the ones that have it, I think you're dealing with a situation, and I've forgotten what the name of this principle is, but you are often, where you are an expert, able to detect just how bad reporting is, just journalistic reporting on something where you know a lot, and then the reporting in every other thing looks okay. Now, increasingly, that's not true, but 10 years ago, that was a widely reported pattern. What that means is that the reporting sucks in all of those places. You're just capable of detecting it in the one where you have the expertise. And my point would be, science, it's like that, right? You will find in each place there's the stuff that's not being said. You can look at the SARS-CoV-2 stuff from the beginning about the natural origin of this thing, right? You had to have a certain kind of expertise to be able to spot how nonsense-filled this story was, but if you did have it, it was clear, and yet you've got...
And if you didn't have it, you were told you were a crackpot conspiracy hypothesist.
Right.
For believing in such a thing.
Exactly. And so, to this day, we're dealing with that outgrowth, which is to see the emptiness of that explanation, of the natural origin explanation, is to sideline yourself. But I wouldn't expect... It's not on you. The fact is, the fields are broken. They're broken because of perverse incentives. It's rare to find a field where that's really not true. And so,
but I mean, I applaud the question. So I feel like you're giving the person writing an out, but I don't think, I'm going to guess here, given the name, that she wants an out. She's looking for a road forward, right? Like, what can I do as someone who is not a scientist to interpret scientific findings and not just have to sit down and shut up when people say, you can't trust that because institutions corrupt science. It is both true that institutions corrupt science and that good science is done.
Well, yes. On the other hand, it's a little, if the person said, I'm not comfortable with the fact that the products I buy result in the misery of the people involved in producing them or the people downstream from the pollutants and making them, how can I, build my life around products that don't hurt people? And the answer is you can't. It's not on you. This is something we have to collectively solve because the individual level solution doesn't exist. So, I don't like saying that, but I also don't want to lead you to believe that there's a good solution to.
I think it's a little bit different, though,
Okay.
Because with regard to products and taking it on yourself, minimize your impact. You are experiencing the personal responsibility vortex, the coin that you termed in your TED Talk years ago.
Term that I coined.
Did I say coin that you termed?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I don't think you did that.
I didn't.
No.
I wouldn't have.
No, you would not have. So I can't get it right. The personal responsibility vortex, a term that you coined in a TED Talk years ago.
Well done.
Would be the thing that you're talking about with regard to seeking to minimize as much as possible the impact of your consumption choices on the environment, for instance, which if there are other reasons for you to do so, terrific. But if you suffer all the costs of minimizing the costs, other people win at cost to you. Whereas in this case, this person is trying to better themselves and not simply make the collective better.
Oh, I get why this person wants to do this, and I want them to do this, but I also know that you're wading into fields in which you've got reciprocity networks in which people are, passing each other's papers through peer review because they want their papers passed through peer review. I mean, look, here's the thing. The year before the replication crisis broke in psychology, it was completely obvious that there would be one. And it's not psychology. Psychology is where it broke first. Any place that you've got statistics and p-values, it was obvious that there was a perverse incentive that was going to result in the complete derangement of all of the work downstream of this, because the way you advanced your career was to publish papers. The way you published papers was to get significance. The way you got significance was to, massage your data.
Green jelly beans cause cancer.
They sure do.
Yeah,
right.
They sure do.
Green jelly beans cause cancer. So the point is, look, it was obvious there was a replication crisis. In light of a replication crisis, how do you figure out which results in psychology are right? Turns out pretty close to none of them, right? So what do you do about that? There's just nothing to do, the thing to do, it is the personal responsibility vortex. The thing to do is to demand science that actually works. And the way you do that is you provide an incentive structure that doesn't cause people to publish bad work in order to advance their careers. Now we do need a drink.
So this is very much like a question that we started with, so we may just refer back to that answer. Given 1, human society's need for religion, and 2, the waning of religion in the West, might the rise of the number of people who are willing to adopt or invent BSC ideologies be tied to their now desperate innate need to believe in something? I don't know what BSC is here. I feel like I'm just forgetting an obvious acronym. But so this differs a little bit from the earlier question or questions about religion, and then it asks whether or not we feel a need to believe in something, that belief may be a sort of a human universal desire, and that in a world that is becoming less coherent, simultaneously more global, so that we can see apparently what everyone else is doing, even though we know that it's highly curated, if not worse, and we can, maybe that.
So I think there's something very much to this idea that we have a need to believe, but I don't think it works the way people think it does. So it drives people crazy, especially dyed-in-the-wool science types. When I say you can't do science without a certain amount of faith, drives them crazy.
Yes,
right?
It does.
But it's absolutely true. It's
Me too, a little bit.
It's provable. Well, but here's the thing. It's not much of a claim, right? The fact is, you do not know that this is not all a hallucination. And in fact, there are explanations that could make it one, right? If this was a simulation, maybe it's a simulation to see what a mind-like collection of circuits does with certain kinds of information. You can't prove that that's not where you are. So you have to have faith.
But we can't get very far if we spend time on such a hypothesis.
Right. Worthless. So the point is, what do? You got two choices. Okay, I'm going to dichotomize. I'm going to go Abrahamic Kendi on this, right?
Oh boy.
But this is a real dichotomy. Okay. You have two choices. You can spend your entire life on one question on which you are guaranteed to make no progress, right? Or you can decide that's not happening. I'm going to take on faith that this is not a simulation designed to figure out what my collection of circuits will do with information that looks like this. In fact, I'm real. Tables are real. I have mechanisms to figure out that they are. If I go into the laboratory, I can run an experiment, and it involves actual equipment spitting out actual data that I can then evaluate for better or worse, right? I can assume that I have the ability to detect the actual world and that allows me to do science and discover things. And my feeling is, I'll tell you what, what's the cost?
Oh, that's good.
What's the cost if I just accept? I can't rule out that this is a simulation designed to see what I will do, but assuming it's not, I can do all this other stuff. I'm just going to take it on faith that the universe is real, and if it ain't, the cost is zero.
Okay, so we need to believe something in order to make progress in whatever realm it is we're trying to make progress in.
Right, but the thing is, that thing, once you do that, once you accept that first little bit of faith, then you're going to find
it opens up so much.
Well, and I mean, that one's the ultimate bargain. I'm guaranteed to waste everything for nothing, or I get access to everything based on a kind of faith I'm not going to worry too much about.
And so you're going to give Ibram Kendi credit for this formulation?
No, I'm just going to go dichotomous because it's actually dichotomous in this case. But the point is, okay, you accept that, and it's such a rush to actually believe that the universe is real and that you can interact with it, right? It's just such a great reward that then you say, well, maybe there's some other bargains, not quite as good as that one. I get everything for nothing, but I get a lot for a little, right? All the heuristics that make your visual system work. You are taking on faith that things end where they seem to end, right? And generally they do. And then occasionally they don't. You know what happens when they don't?
You plummet to your death.
No, well, sometimes, but try not to do that. So, okay.
I'm working on it.
You can get this all from like a couple of subreddits, right? You've got the subreddits that focus on, optical illusions. And it's not always optical, but optical is a very compelling one, right? Where your heuristics mislead you and you see something that isn't right, right? And then there's the subreddit, what could go wrong? Right?
One of your favorites, I know.
Well, you can learn all sorts of things.
Sometimes late at night before you go to bed, you're scrolling through that. I'm like, dude, how do you sleep?
Do you know
what
how many
your dreams look like?
We will never know how many deaths I have avoided because I'm a devotee of what could go wrong. And I learn about these things on my phone rather than by making the error. So anyway, the point is heuristics are like an algorithmic kind of faith, right? They trade on the fact that your system for using photons bouncing around a room to assess where objects are and how you can interact with them actually work. And in general, it's such a good deal, you don't even think you're making a deal. And then every so often you get one wrong and it becomes, oh yeah, it was a heuristic. And every so often, one in 1,000 times the heuristic fails. So anyway, my point is, yes, we need to believe things because we're structured to use heuristics because it's such a damn bargain. And then sometimes you pay the cost. But the question is, how much does this have to do with our need to believe in something like a being above who gives a damn about us and all of that?
Yep.
And I think it differs a lot for different people. I don't need there to be a God above.
Yeah.
Some people do. But I think it is a mistake to assume that our need to believe in something is synonymous with our need to believe in purpose in the universe, because some people have that need and some people don't.
Yeah. 50 minutes. Oh boy. Let me just say, to defend you against the idea that you're spending your last waking minutes looking at what could go wrong, and I can't imagine how you sleep. I tend to spend my last waking minutes reading about, well, if the last week is any indicator, either North Korea or 20th century China, which also does not exactly make for wonderful dreams. So I suppose to each their own with regard to how to plague their own dream space.
In fact, in both those cases, the only reason that China and North Korea are not on what could go wrong is it's hard to know how to photograph the whole thing.
The whole thing,
right?
Yeah. Oh man, there's so many good questions and we're not going to get to most of them. Let me do one more here, and then we'll go to the super chat from this hour. Should Unity promote platonic dialogues annually for the public to read and incorporate into presidential speeches? This can recover lost fundamentals and deploy the best of IDW long-form resources. For instance, McCraven something on true courage. Latches? Is that a name or a? I don't know what that means.
I don't know what the latches means, but anyway, look, to be honest with you, I think Unity 2020 is a manifestation. It is a version of something of which there are many versions in many different realms. And frankly, they have to get together, right? I think Unity 2020 has a lot to do with blockchain. And I think it has a lot to do with open source. And I think it has a lot to do with Game B and IDW. And that all of these things are proof of concept prototypes that have solved some canonical problem in some zone. And the point is we need to stop recognizing them as separate projects. We need to recognize that really it is the overarching project we are about, which is how do we take all of the various failure modes, learn from them, and build around them for the next phase of humanity? Because if we don't, there ain't going to be a next phase of humanity. Yeah. So yes, to your point, but maybe we can expand it a bit.
So we're switching to the next super chat, but I want to read one more comment from this one, and then we will come back to some of these questions in episode 40. Suggestion: turn defund into refund the police. Refund doesn't make sense in terms of normal policing and lends itself to better unpacking and conversation. So I read that because I actually had exactly this thought earlier today and thought, how it rhymes. It's such a match otherwise, and I think what we really want is more funding than we had before in order to start fixing the problems and then potentially scale back. But it's at least potentially an interesting linguistic starting point. Yes.
Two problems. One, the word refund and refund are two different things.
That's true.
But maybe you can get around that because in a defund the police world, refund seems to be the opposite. But the other thing is I really want, I don't want to be caricatured as somebody who thinks we need huge police budgets.
Yeah.
I just think that the police budgets are large because the police are being used to solve a set of problems that are not best solved by the police, which is not so far from a credible version of the claims that are being made. But the point is that argues for doing it right. To the extent that the police are dealing with a mental health crisis because we have no solution for people who have crippling mental health issues and therefore end up on the streets involved in petty and worse crime, that's not an elegant solution to this problem at all. The police don't belong in that equation except very rarely. And so figuring out how not to use the police as a cheap solution to problems is the key. So at some level, I want people to be imaginative enough that what we're really saying is render the police less necessary, right? Let's get them out of the jobs they shouldn't be doing, and let's have them do the jobs they need to be doing. And, there's a lot is possible, but not if your point is let's go after the police and let's be personal about it.
On a scale from unicycle to 18-wheeler, how tired are you of the kleptocratic duopoly?
Did it say kleptocratic?
No, it doesn't. I made that up.
I like
kleptocratic. On a scale from unicycle to 18-wheeler, how tired are you of the kleptocratic duopoly? I like kleptocratic better.
I would say I am Panamax boat tired of the kleptocratic duopoly.
They have no wheels at all.
We're simply measuring wheels? I thought we were measuring how...
Unicycle to 18-wheeler, that looks like a wheel continuum to me.
It does, but it was also a size continuum. And so,
Panamax boat.
Panamax, I'll tell you what, if it's about wheels, some of the Panamax boats, these are boats that are the maximum dimensions to fit in the locks of the Panama Canal.
They're big.
They're very big. And some of them, if I understand it correctly, actually have basically factories in them that finish automobiles in transit to basically smooth out the supply chain so that you're not wasting time. The cars are sitting idle on their way. They could also be being finished on their way. So anyway, a Panamax boat full of cars that are in the process of being finished has 6 wheels per average car. That's a lot of wheels.
6.
I think. Well, you got 4 plus a spare plus a steering.
I knew you were going there. Wow. Okay.
Yep. I feel good about it.
Yes, I know you do. This is a logistics question. Installed Zoom, tried to click into Saturday's meetings with no success. In the future, how can we be certain to get access to meetings to contribute? Apologies if this was already answered, just getting home. So this is going to be about the Campfire. I don't know if you want to just take that to Campfire Logistics people.
Wait. This is Campfire?
I think so. There was a Campfire on Saturday,
meeting.
Right?
Well, I don't know if they're talking about. I don't think it's Campfire. I think this is about Patreon discussions. And I'm dismayed to find out that anybody is having trouble clicking into the meeting. There is
access to means to contribute. Okay, well, so you do this. He does it once a month, the first Saturday and Sunday of the month, and then we do our private Q&A on the last Sunday of the month. So it may be that you, I don't know. So maybe if it is about Patreon, send a message into that Patreon. I don't know if you'll see it. Send a message to DarkHorse Moderator at gmail.com with more specificity around what this was.
We'll take more time here. We will take care of it, but be as specific as possible about what happened. It is possible that you missed a password associated with getting into the meeting.
We'll get it figured.
Yep.
Have you heard of Ralston College?
Yes.
It's founded on Enlightenment values with many great intellectuals like Jordan Peterson involved. It may be the last place offering a real humanities education. We were actually one of the many things that we weren't able to do because of lockdown was go to, I think it was to be their first big weekend-long event that was supposed to be maybe in Savannah this last spring. As I understand it, it's not actually operational yet, and I doubt it will become operational in the near future, given that so many colleges are failing to figure out how to operate. But yeah, Jordan Peterson is on the board or the founding people. There are a lot of good people associated with it, but I do not think that it is yet happening. But yeah, for people who don't know about it, Ralston College, Ralston, which I think is actually to be happening in Savannah, Georgia. They have a website and you can learn a little bit about it. In Game of Thrones, the Unsullied are an army of eunuchs. Would eunuchs make acceptable soldiers in the real world, or is it fictional nonsense or a woke pun? What would such an army's strengths and weaknesses be? Thanks. This is from Echo.
Well, geez, I don't know. I mean, the thing about the Unsullied in Game of Thrones is that we don't know by what mechanism they were trained. And so we actually don't know what incentives drive them. We know what incentives have been removed from them. But Game of Thrones explores this trope in multiple places where it basically, Theon Greyjoy gets remanufactured as a mental slave of, I can't remember.
Ramsay Snow. Yeah.
But anyway, the idea that you could rebuild somebody by altering
and Varys
their
also.
incentive. I wanted to bring up Varys because.
But okay, but before you speak, so you're focusing entirely on incentives and whether or not it would sort of work coherently as an army behaviorally. I suspect, given some of Echo's previous questions, that she is at least as interested in the question of anatomy and physiology, and so it really depends on at what point this would-be army had these unfortunate surgeries done to them. That little boys who are castrated are not going to become warriors who are going to be able to actually win against actually intact male armies. Right? If they were castrated after they'd gone through male puberty, they would have, male anatomy and male physiology and physique and body mass and all of that. And yes, it would change somewhat at the point that they were no longer producing much testosterone on their own, but they would be built like men. Whereas you castrate a little boy and he's not going to end up being built like a man, and so it wouldn't be an effective army.
Right. And so in some sense, this goes back to your distinction between organizational and activational effects, which exactly. I think is if you wanted to invest somewhere in a piece of knowledge that would liberate you from all sorts of scientific nonsense, this would be a great place to do it. Mm-hmm. But then you also have the technological question, which is, okay, if you get the advantage of the organizational effects that make a masculinized army, and then you get presumably the control that this question is predicated on
someone who wants to control an army.
They're wondering if such an army would work. So that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
The organizational effects create the masculinized body, which is better for fighting. The lack of the androgens being produced increases control. But then, technologically speaking, you can introduce and remove androgens at will, which allows even greater control. So if you imagine the
certainly
unsullied,
possible in modern times.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. So the last thing I was going to say on this topic is that Martin, the author,
George R. R. Martin.
George R. R. Martin tells us something about what he actually thinks about this castration stuff, because he says, as people are talking about Varys in early seasons, that nobody trusts a eunuch, which is ironic because in some sense a eunuch should be more trustworthy by virtue of the fact that they're not being jerked around by their gonads. But Martin's point, if it's Martin's point, and I assume it is that the lack of this distortion of maleness, it makes the person less reliable because you don't know actually what they're after.
That got no clues to motive.
Right. Men can be relied upon to be after certain things, and a man who is not after those things is a mystery and therefore dangerous.
Yep.
So anyway, I don't
know.
So
an unsullied army could, if they had masculinized bodies sufficiently enough to be adequate warriors, could actually be more confusing and surprising and therefore more powerful against intact male armies.
Yes, although in the case of the unsullied, they are so well trained that even liberated, they are not the least bit liberated.
Right.
So anyway, I think Martin does a pretty good job of exploring this in Game of Thrones, that, you have the full range from a completely free agent, freed by the lack of gonads, to completely subservient agents by virtue of the training regimen that accompanied castration.
Yep. Hi, Bret and Heather. Thanks for all you do. My wife and I are expecting our first child in January. Congratulations. As successful parents, do you have any recommended readings or general advice for raising successful children? Thanks. We have a list of things that we put into the book that we're writing in the chapter on parenthood and relationship. And in part because there really isn't that out there. Evolutionary parenting isn't yet a field. There are some, halfway decent things that I feel like I read occasionally, but mostly it was us figuring things out as we went alone from an evolutionary perspective, watching as these amazing little critters quickly started trying to game their situation and us, and we responded with love and putting a stop to their gaming.
So I'm going to try just general framework.
Okay.
General framework is kids are designed to be parented. They are designed to be raised. The purpose of childhood is to make highly functional adults. The purpose of life is not to be satisfied. It is to be functional. And all of this amounts to a system that works pretty well by intuition, except for one fact, which is you live in the modern world. And the modern world is not the one for which children are designed, and it is not the one for which parents are designed. And that means that you need to be hyper vigilant about the distortion that comes from modernity. Short of modernity, this would be, I would not say an easy job because it's very expensive in many regards, but it is a straightforward job in normal circumstances, and a very confusing job when, for example, your children will face market forces that are attempting to manipulate them into doing things that are not good for them because it's in somebody else's financial interest. That's not something a hunter-gatherer would encounter. So be very on your guard about novel influences that potentially disrupt the processing that your kid does. But in general, trust your intuition. When Psychological experts tell you you must be very careful not to love your kids too much. They have to cry themselves to sleep or they'll become dependent. They are full of shit, and that's obvious. And just go with your gut on this one, right? Kids are designed to be parented. You're designed to have the right feeling. If you're normal, you're designed to have the right feelings towards them. To the extent that you want to embrace them, you probably do. To the extent they're driving you crazy, you probably need to tell them so. It's straightforward, but for modernity.
Okay, let's do a few more, and then we'll stop for today. In the age of functional, mostly 3D printed semi-automatics, will gun control remain even possible for much longer?
No, it won't. It's already a matter of limits that amount more to people's limits of imagination than to any practical detail.
Yeah. What role do you believe that xenoestrogens such as BPA, phthalates, and analogs are playing in the rate of transsexualism, given their established high occurrence in human bodies and known effects on the INAH3, the human SDN? I don't recognize those last two abbreviations, but the larger question is basically we've got estrogens entering the water supply, entering the environment at rates that are far higher than they ever have before from things like phytoestrogens, which is to say that estrogens and their analogs exist in nature, but we have been synthesizing them and then releasing them through our trash and our urine into water supply that then effectively feminizes boys. And absolutely that's happening. Yes. It's how explanatory is it? How many hypotheses are there, each of which have some role to explain in the actual legitimately increasing rates of transsexualism? I don't know, but it is certainly one factor.
Yeah, it's certainly one factor. There's also clearly a cultural contagion factor, which dovetails with a general disruption of normal environments. So
sure. I think there are many things going on with regard to the rise in trans, and this person specifically writes transsexualism, and I think that's intentional, right? Like transsexualism and transgender, as I ask in my recent letter to Abigail Schreier in our letter wiki about specifically the contagion aspect of the rise in teenage girls declaring themselves transgender. At what point did we stop calling it transsexual and started calling it transgender? This is a muddling of the issue at best, and frankly, transgender, acting in ways that are historically more like the other sex would act, should warrant certainly nothing hormonally or surgically, and probably nothing at all, at least within some confines. Whereas, transsexualism, like actually legitimately feeling like one of the many manifestations of your sex, is out of whack with the sex that you are. Usually it's your brain telling you for sure that the sex that your chromosomes and your gametes and your anatomy and your physiology say you are is not the thing that you say you are. Are xenoestrogens contributing to basically a broader array of intersex conditions effectively? Yeah. I think they are, but there's also social contagion, which may have nothing at all to do with that. But it's really a different evolution of transness.
But what I wanted to get at was the interaction between these things. I think that there's some gateway which looks like, I feel like something's off, right? I feel like something is off, and I want it not to be off anymore. And so I'm looking for the thing that's off so I can fix it, right?
Yep.
And the point is, okay, one of the things that's liable to be off is that you are getting a lot of estrogens that you're not supposed to be exposed to if you're a boy, or you're not supposed to be exposed to them if you're anybody, but if you're a boy, it has a particular effect, which is making you feel even more off. And then somebody says, you know what? A lot of people who are feeling off are really just fine. They're just facing a kind of oppression where civilization is telling them that they are something. It's denying who they really are. And it sounds like, you know what? Maybe that's it. Maybe I really am something else, and I would feel fine if I was that thing, but I'm being told I'm this other thing, and that's why everything seems so wrong. And so people embrace it. Mm-hmm. And then the point is, well, that didn't work. because everything is still crazy, right?
Well,
You're still interfacing with a world that is not well suited to you.
And no wonder that this is largely happening at the point that these kids are teenagers, when guess what you're doing as a teenager is you're trying to figure out who you are and why you no longer are the kid you once were and are not yet the adult that you might become or are hoping to become or haven't yet even imagined what it might look like to become. That age, that era in your life is exactly about, it doesn't quite feel right. This isn't fitting. I'm trying to figure out what it is that I'm going to be doing. And so to have a political ideology move in and say, we've got the solution for you, it involves going under the knife and taking hormones that are going to change your life forever. Well, that's child abuse.
Yeah, it is. I mean, at the same moment that you frankly have Cardi B telling you what, the cool sexuality is, which is insane. And then you have Joe Biden sitting down with Cardi B for an interview because the Democratic Party is, of course, on board. You can't make this stuff up. Nope. The point is everything is broadcasting some message that you can't possibly process normally because it's not a normal message. It's a malevolent message. And anyway, I think what you're finding is a lot of people looking for the same thing that makes them susceptible to get-rich-quick schemes and snake oil, right? The sense that there's got to be some way. There's just got to be some way. Tell me what switch I can flip. And now, hey, guess what? We've got the ultimate switch. If you find something off-putting about the sexual message you're being expected to interface with, then there's a reason for that. And it's called trans, and here's what you got to do. And so anyway, the point is, the BPA and the other estrogens that you may be taking in feed into the sense that something isn't right. And then this other thing doesn't have to be connected to it directly. It just has to be connected to the fact that people for whom things don't feel right are looking for an answer. And this answer happens to be fashionable at the moment, which isn't to say that there aren't real transgender people, which there are, and there always have been. But the point is the level of it, the degree to which this has risen as an issue can just be a matter of lots of things that create a sense of being ill at ease and a small number of solutions that are becoming fashionable. And there you have it. Yeah.
Okay, 2 more questions. What are we at, Zach? An hour and 12 minutes. Okay, we'll do 2 more here. The next one is a comment, although there is a rhetorical question at the end. If the goal is to move toward a polychronic way of thinking, can I discuss my sex life at work since personal and work are combined? Can I have sex at work? I don't think it's well thought through. This person concludes. Yeah, it's not. It's not.
Yeah. You make a good point. I mean, it's pretty... It's
far
pretty
better than they do.
Right.
Yes. Brett, you often refer to rent-seeking elites.
Yes,
Can you offer 1 or 2 specific examples to illustrate their behavior and make them tangible to me?
So let's say that you... run a fossil fuel extraction company, and you become skeptical of anthropogenic global climate change because it is politically in your interest to continue selling your fossil fuels as long as possible, and even though it might be in civilization's interest, to switch to a modality of moving from place to place or working from home or, battery-driven cars from solar power, whatever it is. So you become motivated to obstruct the new mechanism because you're profiting from the old mechanism. So you are externalizing the harm of fossil fuels in an effort to maintain your profit stream. You have contributed something to the market. You've contributed fossil fuels, which have a value, but they also have a cost, which because it's externalized rather than internalized, you don't experience directly. And so anyway, this deranges our conversation about atmospheric chemistry, and you may fund research that results in there being more confusion on this issue than there should have been. So that's an example of a rent-seeking elite protecting their profit stream while deranging the conversation in a way that externalizes harm.
Well done.
All right.
I think we're done.
We're there.
Yeah.
All right. Cool.
So, as always, join us on our Patreons for a variety of of perks, including access to a private monthly Q&A. At Bret's at the higher levels, he does a couple of 2-hour conversations among a small group of people on Saturday and Sunday, the first Saturday and Sunday of the month. And there's a Discord that you have access to at either of them. The Clips channel will have some clips chosen by a guy that we trust and like very much. And he puts them up there. And this channel also exists. So
like,
subscribe if you don't.
Subscribe, comment. And please come join Unity if you haven't done it yet. There's going to be opportunities for you to influence our process upcoming very soon. So now would be a great time to get on our mailing list. All right. Thanks, everyone. We will see you next time.